Peace process may have been given a fresh boost as a result of surprise talks between the US president and Russia's foreign minister.
And I think that we're going to do very well with respect to Syria. I think things are happening that are really, really, really positive. We're going to stop the killing and the death. We had a very, very good meeting with Mr. Lavrov.
Just as Donald Trump, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov was also very optimistic and positive about the meeting they held today. The meeting itself was a surprise. He was initially meant to just conversate with his U.S. counterpart Rex Tillerson, but then it became known late last night that he would meet the president as well. And the meeting itself is in essence a continuation of the talks that the two sides have had over the last month, when Tillerson came to Moscow to hold talks with both Lavrov and the Russian President Vladimir Putin. So now basically the same thing happened in D.C. The topics were also the same. The two countries fight against world terrorism, the situation in Syria. Well, I actually asked the foreign minister, the Russian foreign minister Sergei Lavrov, about the de-escalation zones in Syria, which he believes would be the solution to solve the Syrian conflict on the entire territory of Syria. And I asked him in the context of the pessimism recently expressed by the Pentagon that there was a lot of devil in the details when it came to these de-escalation zones.
The devil's always in the detail. It's a well-known fact. In Astana, we agreed further steps that will be taken so that the interested parties will agree on how and who will secure the de-escalation zones. We've confirmed today our interest in the US role, and I think they're also interested in that.
Lavrov also spoke about bilateral relations between Washington and Moscow, and he admitted that they are still in a very low point. They still have a lot left to be desired, but he affirmed the determination from President Trump, that's what he heard from him personally, to build this relationship into a mutually beneficial and pragmatic. And also he fired a few shots at the predecessor of Donald Trump in the White House.
Our bilateral relations aren't very positive, and the reason for that is well known. The previous administration did everything to undermine the basis of it. Trump has shown that he wants to establish constructive and productive relations with Russia.
Lavrov's trip to D.C. coincides with a lot of furor about, the fact that he is here talking with the top officials, even though they both declared that they're here to talk business. And believe it or not, 4 questions at the press conference from U.S. journalists were about the alleged Russian meddling. And at times it even seemed that the reporters were not even listening to Lavrov when he responded to the previous questions. And at some point, I think it was the 4th question, the foreign minister got a little bit irritated with those questions.
Did I understand correctly that President Trump hasn't brought up Russian involvement in the U.S. election last year?
I've just said that President Trump publicly called it fiction. Put on the table just one single fact, then we'll react to it. It's been going on for months, but there hasn't been a single fact, any evidence presented.
And just a little earlier than that, Lavrov used a very old Russian word, bacchanally, to describe this whole craziness going over the allegations that Russia meddled somehow in the U.S. elections. Nonetheless, the foreign minister is now off to Alaska for an Arctic forum there, and we'll keep you updated on how that goes.
Well, we sounded out several political commentators on the prospects of US-Russian joint efforts in Syria.
Right now, there's been no harsh statements from the United States about these safe zones, so I think this is very good, and it looks like they're moving along. Just the acceptance of the idea that we should be talking and practicing diplomacy rather than threats and intimidation, but there are obviously a lot of problems there that have to be worked out. But I would say in the last week, in the last couple of days, very positive things have been happening.
There is clearly a desire on the part of the Trump administration to get back on course with the policies of candidate Trump. Trump has pledged to make progress on stopping the killing, and the only way he can do that, if he's at all serious, is by getting on board with the Astana process. Let's not forget that American Middle East policy is like a supermarket trolley with a broken wheel, careering down the aisle. What seems like a sensible approach today veer off course very easily. Tomorrow, if Trump sees a picture of an injured, beautiful baby, that's all it might take to set things back.
Well, earlier I talked to Daniel McAdams, the Executive Director for the Ron Paul Peace Institute. He believes that it's time to move past the difficulties created by the previous U.S. administration.
Anytime diplomacy takes the place of empty threats or even not empty threats, it obviously is good. If they can start having a relationship, get over some of the sloganeering that we've heard, even, I'm sorry to say, from Tillerson himself a few weeks ago, get away from the sloganeering, look at more constructive ways. And I think Lavrov himself said that this meeting at least was devoid of a lot of the ideological things that happened when Obama was in power. That, I think, is a very good sign.
During the Russian foreign minister's media conference, some journalists again raised the question of possible Russian involvement in U.S. politics, namely the election. Sergei Lavrov reacted. Let's take a listen together.
I think it's humiliating for Americans to hear that U.S. internal politics is ruled by Russia. How is it possible for such a great nation to think this way?
Well, it's a kind of a mass psychosis. You've seen this throughout history. You had the Red Scare. You had around World War I when anti-war people were being rounded up in the U.S. There's a kind of a mob mentality out there that is completely irrational. But he makes a good point. If the entire election, if America was ready to go vote for Hillary, and all of a sudden, by some chance, they turned on RT and it convinced them to vote for Trump, that would be the most powerful propaganda in the history of the universe. It's really quite a joke to think that this somehow changed people's votes. But of course they don't say that. They don't tell us exactly what Russia did. We know that the U.S. tried to influence the French elections. Former President Obama endorsed one of the candidates openly. That's something even further than anyone is even accusing the Russians of doing. But that's okay if we do it.